In this How-To-Svelte, we're going to make a password generator and plug the password generator into a registration form just like this one. So ideally, we should just be able to fill out the form. And when it asks for a password, we can get a secure password by clicking this, selecting what length we want the password to be, and then have it randomly generate characters, copy it to the clipboard, paste it in, and then we'll have this little toggle option to be able to see the password or to hide it. And then finally, click the registration button, and that will just call a console log. It won't actually send anything. But the goal of it is just to make this random password generator. And to get started, we're going to just take this one component, the password generator, and head on over to blank Svelte REPL. And what I did was I just copied the password generator HTML and CSS inside of the app component. And we'll work on how to make a random password. We'll first start by looking at JavaScript's string object. And they've got a method called fromCharCode. And we can enter a code that's within Unicode. If we console log what that will produce, you'll get an idea. So if I just put the number 65 in there and console log it, you can see the letter A comes back. If I do 165, V comes back. If I do 1165, then some other character comes back. And you can go several places up and you can see other languages, Korean, Japanese, Chinese. All of these are part of Unicode. So Unicode covers a very, very wide selection of characters. Now we're only concerned with characters that are uppercase and lowercase A through Z, as well as numbers 0 to 9, and some symbols. I'm going to make an object called char groups. And I'm going to make it be an array. And each object, I'll call this one lowercase. And its min value for lowercase will be 97. And 97 is a lowercase a. And its last property will be max. And 122 is lowercase z. But we're actually going to go up to 123. And I'll explain a little bit later on why that is. So that will be the lowercase. And now I'm going to go ahead and make another one for uppercase. And I'm also going to make one for numbers. So for the numbers, you can see if we start at 48, we get a 0. If we go up to 58 or 57, we get 9. And again, we're going to go up just one higher than normal. Again, I'll explain why in a little bit later. And then the last one we want to do in here are some symbols. And so I grabbed a range from 33 to 43. We can take a look at some of those. Okay, so that'll cover a wide range of symbols. Okay, so now basically we have our char groups that we're going to use. So let's go ahead and make a function where we make a random character. And basically the first thing we want to do is we want to randomly pick one of these objects. And so we'll use mathfloor and math.random, and we want to pick a random number between 0 and 3. So 0, 1, 2, 3. But math.random excludes the max. So if we do math.random times 4, it'll actually pick a random number between 0 and 3. But instead of hard-coding 4, what we're going to do is we're going to do chargroups.length, which is the equivalent of writing down 4. But if we actually want to add some more objects in here by doing chargroups.length, it just kind of covers us in the future. Okay, the next thing we want to do is we want to access, once char type has been defined, then we want to access the low number from char groups. So char groups whatever number this generates, in other words, whichever object it picks, and then we want this key. So we'll do .min, and so that will get the low number, and then we also want to get the high number. We're going to need to access this property, max. So this will generate the index number, this will get the low, this will get the high number. And then the last thing we want to do is we want to select a number between this high and low. So whichever object it picks, we want to select a random number between 65 and 91. Or if it selects this one, we want to select a random number between 48 and 58. And so this last part has to do that. Okay, so that makes this function here. Let's just call this and see what happens. So you can see we did it 3 times and it generated a random number each time. Now what are we going to do with this number? Well, this will make the next function, which will help us make a random password. So we'll call this one. So we'll make a variable called code and we'll set it to an empty string. And let's make a character. And we'll use the string object and its method called fromCharCode. And within here, we need a number. And this function returns a number. So what we'll do is we'll just call this function inside here. We'll set code, we'll assign code to char, and then we'll console log code. And so now if I call makeRandomPassword, it should generate a single character. So what happened here is this function selected the numbers object, and it randomly picked 52, which you can see 52 is between 48 and 52. And then we used that code in fromCharCode to create a character, and that character is 4. Let's call it again and see what happens. So here it used the lowercase object, and it picked 117, which is between 97 and 123, and it took 117 and used fromCharCode to generate the character lowercase u. So that's what's going to happen. You can see we don't have a password with just one, so we're going to need to generate either 8 characters or 12 characters or 25 characters. We'll do that in a for loop. And so let's define code length. Code length will need to be tied to whatever is selected in this menu. So let's go ahead and make a variable up here, menu selection. And we'll hard code it to 8 since it defaults to 8. And this menu is here in the code. So we could bind the value of this select menu to menu select. And let's just try that. Let's go ahead and reactively console log menu select. And there you see 8 shows up. Now if I pick 15, 15 shows up, 25, good. Now interestingly enough, what makeRandomPassword's going to need is an actual number. And what we're getting back now is a string. We'll take menu select, and whatever value comes back as a string, we'll reactively change it. We'll call this password length. And so what happens is we select this, and then we'll click the button make password. So let's come down here to make password, and we'll put an on click. When onClick happens, then we will call makeRandomPassword, and it's going to require an input of a code length. And that code length, that number, is going to come from password length. Remember, we're going to select something. It's actually a string. And then password length reactively takes that string and changes it to a number. And we're going to feed that number into this function, makeRandomPassword. And then after the loop is done, we'll have a code that is 8 characters long in this case. And so we'll want to return code, but actually what we're going to do is once the code is generated, we're going to save it into this. And what is this? This actually is an input. And we'll take this input and bind its value to a variable that we'll make that variable up here. We'll call it, we'll just call it password. And so we'll bind this input to password, but now password's got to equal this code. So once this generates 8 random characters and they all get set into this string code, then we're going to say that password is now assigned to that string of numbers. And so when I click make password, you can see 8 random numbers are created. They're then converted over to a character using fromCharCode. They're then appended to this code variable, and then we take that code and assign it to password. Here's password, and password is bound to this input, which is a read-only input, so it shows us the password here. So let me clear. Now let's try maybe a 15-character password. So I'll click make password. We'll try 25 characters. Click make password. These are all the numbers generated. They're then converted into characters, and then the characters show up in the input. So the last 2 things we need to deal with this password generator form is the copy. So when we click copy, we actually want to highlight this code and copy it to the clipboard. And then, of course, we want to handle this X icon to close this modal. So let's deal with the copy first. So we'll make another function called copyCode, and that will use the event object. And we'll make a variable, let's call it PW for password. And this input has an ID of code, so we'll select it by that. Then we'll say PW. Then we'll use the document method called execCommand, which with the argument copy will copy whatever we have in our target here. And so we want to call this function when we click this button, the copy button. So on the copy button, let's put an onClick event listener. So let's try that. So we'll make a random string of 8 characters. We'll copy it. And if we paste it, here, let's do another one. So it starts with an F and then a closing parentheses. So we'll copy it. If we paste it here, F closing parentheses. Good. Then the last thing we want to do is use this X icon that when it's clicked, it closes this modal. So we basically have the password generator component working, and now it's sitting inside of app. So let's take everything out of here. We'll copy it and put it into its own component, and we'll call it PasswordGen.Svelte. So we pasted everything from app into PasswordGen component, and then we'll take this component and import it into app. So now app is empty, and we'll go ahead and import PasswordGen. Good, so we can basically see it. Now what we're going to do is work on toggling, hiding, and showing this modal. So let's go ahead and make a variable up here called modal showing. And we'll basically say, we'll use an if block here. If modal showing is true, then show it. Otherwise, it'll be hidden. And it hides itself because right now it's false, but if we set it to true, it'll come back again. And so we'll get this working once we get our form plugged into here. And we're going to get that form from W3 Schools. There's a register form here, which we can go ahead and just copy the HTML and CSS. And I'm going to do that inside its own component, and I'll call this component reg form. And then we'll take reg form and we'll import it into app. And so basically the form shows up. And I'm going to tweak the form a little bit here so it matches what we want it to do. If we look back at the old example here, it only has one password input, and then we included a button here as well as a checkbox input. So one of the first things we can work on is getting the password generator form to show up, and that's going to happen when we click this button here. And so on this button, when we click it, we can forward this on-click listener up to the parent app. And so within reg form here, we'll do on-click, and what on-click will do, set modal showing to true. It'll assign modal showing to true. Okay, so if we do that now, we get it to show up. And now when we click this button, we want it to hide. And so this X icon is in the PasswordGen component. And so this span right here is this close icon. So let's do an on-click, which we'll call a function called handleClose. We'll make that function here. And because this is a child component, we can't control this Boolean value inside app. We can't send a value up to app unless we use createEventDispatcher. Then we'll make a variable called dispatch, and we'll set it to createEventDispatcher. Now down in our function, handleClose, we'll call dispatch, and the argument we're going to pass in is actually the name of the event we're going to pass up to app. And so inside PasswordGen component, we'll do onClose. And onClose will basically take this same anonymous function and set it to false. So now if I click this button, that sets it to true, and if I click this, it sets it to false. So now if I open it, I can generate a password, make the password, copy it, close. I can then paste it in, and now we're not even sure if it's really right because I can't see it, and that's what this checkbox is going to do. So when we click this checkbox, we want to take this password, which is concealed, and reveal it so we can double check and make sure that it works. So this is inside the reg form component. So let's go over to the checkbox. That's here. And we'll call an onChange event listener. And this checkbox is a lot like the button. It's going to toggle a value. So again, we'll just put another anonymous function and we'll create a value. We'll create a variable called showPW, and we'll assign it to the opposite value of showPW. Now we haven't created this variable yet, so let's come up into the script tags, and we'll create that, and we'll set it to false, because we actually don't want to see the password yet. Only when we click this checkbox, then it gets set to true. So here's the checkbox. But this checkbox is going to control whether this input right here, password, which is right here, and you can see the type is set to password. But password by itself, by its nature, conceals the passwords. It won't actually show characters. The only way we can get it to show characters is if we change password to a text, input of type text. But then the problem with that is that it's the security issue. You don't want to have your password be shown out in public unless you decide to. So what we'll do here is we'll actually use some Svelte syntax, and we'll use a ternary statement here. And we'll say if showPW, which is what we made up here, if showPW, then we want the type to be text. Else, we want the type to be password. So that's saying if showPassword is true, we want this input type to be the type text. If showPassword is false, then we want the input type to be password. So let's try that. Make password, copy the characters. So right now we can't see it because it's of type password, but if I click this, it now changes it to type text. And text, by its nature, shows the characters in the input. But if we take it off again, now the show password is false and type becomes password, and its nature is to not reveal the characters. So after we've entered our email, we enter our we generate our password, paste it in. It's everything we want it to be, and then we come down here and click register. And now if we click it now, nothing's going to happen. But what we'll do is we'll call an onSubmit on the form, and we'll make sure to prevent default so that the form doesn't get submitted by default. And in here, we'll call an anonymous function that console logs form submitted. And let's see what that does. And so you can see here, even though I've submitted the form, these inputs still have the password and the text in. So let's clear those out after we submit. So let's take this console log out, and we'll create a function called handleSubmit. And in the script tags, we'll create that. Okay, so what we could do is we'll go ahead and just use some traditional JavaScript here. And then we could do the same thing for the password. So let's try this out. And so the inputs get emptied out, and the last line should say form submitted. So good. And so that's how you can make a password generator and incorporate it into a form using Svelte.